Hello, this is part 2 of my stitch book where we will look at cutting the fabric that we have started to assemble into our book. Last class we had a number 5 embroidery needle, and it came from a Singer pack that also had a magnet. I know it's a number 5 because it says number 5 in very tiny print on the back of this package. I also mentioned that some of you might like using smaller needles even though they're harder to thread, so I'm just going to point out a couple, and I will add another threading the needle video at the end of this. Needle sizes go up as they get smaller. So these size 7s have a larger eye than these size 8s, which have a larger eye than this 8 to 10s. These little baby guys are the 12s. So needle size is larger when the number is smaller. So we're working with a 5. I was going to review threading it. So I hold the thread between my thumb and my forefinger of my non-dominant hand, and then I locate the eye of the needle and I slide the eye over that thread, and I kind of move the needle between my fingers as it slides down the thread between my fingers, and then I pull it through. I've already knotted this thread, but I will quickly show you that I hold it between my thumb and my forefinger. I put it on my finger, and then I wrap it around 2 times, and I hold it in my non-dominant hand and then slide that needle through to make the knot. But I've already got the knot, and if you want to watch me knot it again, there's another little spot at the end where you can see that. So if you've already started sewing your squares together, you should have 1, 2, 3, 4 3-inch squares. And you can see I've got them on the back of that mat, so you can see they're exactly 3 inches, or you can use the acrylic ruler to measure from the edges and see that. And we'll be working with a new cutting tool instead of scissors, a rotary cutting tool that might make it easier to cut more precise squares from fabrics, especially fabrics that might be trickier to cut with scissors or that are a little bit thick. But for now, I'm going to start sewing. So you might have gotten 2 squares sewn together, and the first thing we're going to do is take a back stitch in the end. So I've knotted my thread, and now I've got it on my needle, and there's already a knot in it, and I'm going to go backwards first. I also mentioned drawing your line. You can certainly draw your line, and I'm going to demonstrate drawing it with the ballpoint pen. I think one of you were kind of surprised when I used a pencil, but this is the back side, so you're not really going to see this. Ballpoint pen, you might see a little bit of it through, so if you want to be more careful, use a pencil. But I'm going to mark that line with the pen so you can see it really well as I'm sewing. So then you can see where my mark is. Is it exactly 1/4 inch? No, but it's good enough. All right, so my first stitch is backward. Because I'm right-handed, I like to sew from right to left. So I start on the right side and I go backwards. So here's my knot, and then here's my backward stitch. I make 1 backward stitch before I start sewing forward. And when I sew forward, I actually move the fabric back and forth a little bit to kind of load it onto the needle. And once I've got 3 or 4 stitches on there, then I push the needle through, pull the thread through behind it, and you can see the stitches that lay flat. If you pull too hard right here, and I'll do it just to show you, you're going to gather or pucker your stitches. You don't want that. You want it to sit flat so you don't have to pull too hard. And then you're going to continue up, down, until you get all the way across your set of squares. Now, the one challenge I was showing everybody who was able to stay till the end is, if you look here, I have done something called butting my seams. That means one piece of fabric is folded one way, on this set of squares, I've folded toward the darker fabric, which is an easy way to remember which way to go. And I've folded toward the darker fabric here. That means the folds actually meet where I've put the right sides together. And it means when I sew across, I won't be sewing across all 4 layers of fabric. I'm only going to have to sew across 2 on either side of what is called a butted seam. Some of you also saw that I was folding them kind of origami style when I was done. I won't do that with this one, but I will show you what the butted seam looks like once I'm done sewing across. So now I gotta sew fast. Oops, I got another needle caught in here. That one's not time for you yet. Here I'm starting to get my seam sewn, so my thread is white. I hope you can see it okay. And going across this butted seam, I'm gonna go up, down, up, down. I'm almost there. So I've started getting into the back and I'm coming to the front and going right through that fold. Down, up through that fold is a little bit thicker here. I'm going through 3 pieces of fabric instead of just 2, but I shouldn't go through 4. I should have 3 here and 3 here and the fold in the middle, and you'll see it when I open it up what that looks like. Sometimes when I get to this halfway point, I might also take a back stitch because you saw that puckering that happens when I pull the thread like this. If I don't want it to pucker later, I can take a back stitch, and a back stitch will kind of lock the thread in place so that it can't pucker. So I might take a back stitch here. And then I will continue all the way to my edge and show you what it looks like to sew our first 4-patch block. And your job is to do 2 of these. So you're going to cut 8 3-inch squares, and you're going to sew 2 together 2 times, and then sew 2 together once like this to make what is called a 4-patch. We're going to use 2 4-patches in our book for our inside cover pieces, but I can also use them for my pages. So if you want to do more, you could actually do 4 4-patch blocks, but I'm only going to be showing you 2 when we return. So here's the first one. Did I finish it? I need one more little bit of seam here. So I'm going to go up, down, up, down, up, down, and when I get to the end, I'm going to tie a knot. A couple of you wanted to see that knot again too, so here's your chance. Up, down, up, down. Okay, I'm almost at the end. I'm going to take one more stitch, and then when I come up in the last point here, I'm going to get even closer if you can see that, I'm going to go back. And after I go backward, I'm going to come up near the second to the last stitch, and I can tie a knot to that thread in that stitch. So I can go under that thread and come through this loop here, and that's going to make a knot. So as I pull it through, this knot, there's the knot. That has anchored the thread, and now that it's anchored, I can cut it. And just to remind you how the seam ripper works and how the knife part of that seam ripper works, I'm actually going to cut it with the seam ripper. So if I put the thread in the U-shaped hole in my seam ripper and I just give it a little tug, it's going to cut on that little blade. So you can cut with your seam ripper if you don't have your scissors handy. All right, so that's my square. Now if I open it up, you should be able to see what it looks like when it's a finished 4-patch. There is my first finished 4-patch. 1, 2, 3, 4. Your job is to sew at least 2 of these for the book and possibly 4. And stick around if you want to see me knot that thread again at the end. If you want to iron this and you've got an iron, great. If not, just bring it to class like this next week with your 2 6-inch squares, and we will start learning how to stitch the letters on the cover of this book and possibly even start making our pages. Okay, see you next week.